Installing the IBM x3850 X6 into the rack. Note, this installation video is of a 4U chassis, which is similar to an 8U chassis. If you have an adjustable rack, set the distance between the front and rear EIA flanges to 719 millimeters, 28.3 inches, outside to outside of the rack. Make sure there is sufficient room in the front of the EIA flange to provide a minimum bezel clearance of 50 millimeters. When you install a 4U server, be sure to install the rails in the bottom unit of the 4U area in the rack. To identify the space for the server, complete the following steps. Select an available 4U space in the rack to install your server. Position the rack template that comes with the server on the front of the rack at the location where you want to install the server. Align the template with the holes in the rack. Note that the template is located in the rack installation guide. If you are shipping the server in a rack, install the M5 cage nuts for square holes or M5 clip nuts for round holes from the shipping bracket kit in the holes that are indicated on the template. Repeat the procedure for the rear of the rack. Make sure that the cage nut or clip nut is installed in every hole indicated in the template. Retract both chassis rails if they are not already retracted. Position the left chassis rail in the selected location on the rear of the rack. Align the post on the chassis rail with the corresponding holes on the rear of the rack rail. Insert the post on the rear of the chassis rail through the holes on the rear rack rail until the hooks snap into place. Pull the chassis rail forward and insert the posts on the front of the chassis rail into the holes on the front rack rail until it snaps into place. Repeat the same step to install the other rail. Note, make sure that the bottom edge of the chassis rail is aligned with the bottom U that you want the chassis to rest on. If you misalign the chassis rail, press the locking hook's release or squeeze the locking hooks on the chassis rail, slide the posts out of the hole and try again. Make sure that the chassis rail posts protrude through the holes on the front rack rail. Install an M5 hex head screw in each end of the rail. Use the lower threaded hole on the front and the upper threaded hole on the rear. Repeat the same step for the other rail. To install the server in the rack, complete the following steps. Remove the server components from the front and rear of the server. For example, removing the compute books and power supplies will reduce the weight of the server and allow the server to be easily installed in the rack. To release the handles on the server, press the blue buttons on each side of the server. Attention! To ensure proper installation of the server, do not push the rear lift handles down into the chassis until the server is securely on the rails in the rack. When sliding the server forward to remove it from the rack, eject the lift handles as soon as they are cleared from any server immediately above the one that you are removing. Lift the server up, place the rear of the server onto the rails, and slide the server into the rack until the rear handles are near the front EIA flanges. While supporting the front of the server, press down on the rear handles on both sides of the server to close them and lock them in place. Slide the server further into the rack until the front handles are near the front EIA flanges. Then press the front handles down to lock them in place. Slide the server all the way into the rack. If the server is installed in a vibration-prone area, the server can be fastened into the rack after it is installed. Remove the plastic trim bezels from the left and right side of the server. Install the 4 black M5 combination head screws through the front of the server. There are 2 screws on each side. After all the screws are installed, tighten all of the screws. Reinstall the plastic trim bezels on both sides of the server. Reinstall all components. Note, in order to install the cable management bracket, the distance between the front and rear EIA rails of the rack must be no more than 719 millimeters. If the distance between the EIA rails is greater than the 719 millimeters, you cannot install the cable management bracket. To attach the cable management bracket, align the tabs on the bracket with the holes on the chassis. Install the bracket into the chassis and slide it down until fully seated.